Boom, and we're live. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Men with Purpose. Today, I'm joined by Evan Veritas. Evan is a men's facilitator and the founder of Integral Alpha. At Integral Alpha, they're building a brotherhood of purpose-driven embodied men who are committed to sourcing their deepest gifts from the masculine core. Wow. Evan, thanks for taking the time to do this together, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me, brother.
Pleasure is all mine. I like to start these podcasts with just taking a deep breath and just doing a quick check and just really taking time to slow down for a second and take a deep breath. And maybe if you want to share whatever's present for you right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. What's present for me? I'm slightly over caffeinated, but excited to be here. This is the first podcast I've been on in this iteration of what I'm creating, so I'm just really excited to have a conversation and kind of get the message out there. For sure.
What an honor to do that. Then. First one is always a special one. I'm feeling very, very grateful. Always a pleasure when I'm sitting down with another man that we can dive into this kind of work and talk a little about life and how we can help each other and etc. So I'm super grateful. I'm checking in with that. Man, I was trying to find a little bit more information online, and I'm curious to know a little bit more about your story. What was Evan like before you found men's work? What was, kind of the dynamics there a little bit, and then how did you find the work, if you will? What happened there? What changes did you make, or what breakthroughs did you had along the way?
Yeah, no, it's great. I can give you a bit of my origin story, and yeah, I've took a long time off of social media. And so it's hard to find a lot of information about me and also just about the work that I'm doing now. But I've seen that, the impact that I want to have involves sometimes using these channels. So I'm kind of full force now going for it, as much as I kind of have a love-hate relationship. But my origin story. Yeah. So I grew up, like a lot of men, my parents split when I was young, at 5. My dad left. I grew up with my mom got remarried. I grew up with my mother. She got remarried to a man that very loving, good man, but just some of his ideals and kind of he had his own traumas, his own stuff that he was dealing with in his life. Had raised a family previously and everything, so there was always a bit of a rift there, and I didn't get a lot of interaction with my father. So just like right off the bat in my life, I didn't have a lot of really strong, powerful masculine role models around, at least consistently. And even with my father, who's more of like a traditional kind of masculine man, good at everything, an excellent athlete, great with his hands, an entrepreneur, all these great things. He has his own stuff too, and there was always a little bit of depth. Like he fulfilled all the traditional kind of roles and was great in that way. But there is a deeper aspect which I always felt was lacking in the men around me in my life. And so fast forward, had a really crazy teenage years, especially from like 17 to 19. Just getting into a lot of trouble. I dropped out of high school. I was into drugs. I ended up in the ER a few times because of overdosing. I got charged with a violent crime, which I luckily was able to evade because I was still a youth. So just like my life just started to get out of control a little bit. And reflecting now, I didn't know at the time, but reflecting now, I think what I was really missing was just like some really strong masculine leadership and guidance in my life and boundaries, really. Because, my mom really dominated the house, and with her energy dominating the house, I literally had free reign to do whatever I want because she didn't have the discipline. She didn't have the control over me like a lot of young men actually need, you know what I mean? And I think there's another conversation there, but just how societally we've kind of let these things lapse and the conversation around, not having those strong masculine figures, and the impact it has on younger men. But all that aside, ran into a lot of trouble, kind of found spirituality, I guess I would say it. I started doing yoga. I started eating better. I started looking at all these aspects of my life. Like, I don't want to end up in prison. I don't want to end up on the streets, so started to turn my life around, completed high school, ended up going to college, all that, going to university and getting a degree. And then about 25, I was about 25. I'd been doing all sorts of work, you know, trying different things. I worked in offices for a bit. I went and worked in the oil rigs in Canada,
Wow.
fracking. So getting out. Yeah. So just like I worked on a fishing boat off the Pacific Northwest, like just, I was seeking that masculine challenge, that edge, you know, I was seeking that adventure. I traveled the world as well. And I came back to Canada and, you know, I was like still not having the relationships that I wanted. I never really felt deeply connected. Like I had brothers, I had friends, but like I never had a real brotherhood. And there's kind of a distinction there, you know, men that really had my back, that I could go to with anything, that were kind of playing a bigger game in life or up to something bigger than just going to the bars and kind of living a more conventional 9 to 5 life. You know what I mean? So all that said, I was dating this woman. I was living on Vancouver Island. I'm Canadian, by the way. I was living on Vancouver Island, which is the west coast of Canada, and fell in love with this woman. We're living together, but I just could not handle her energy. Like I just did not know how to handle her. Like she was extremely feminine, extremely wild, unpredictable, beautiful. I loved all of it, but I was like, I don't know what to do with this. Like I have no fucking clue how to handle this person because it's so erratic. She never says what she does, what she says she was going to do, all this kind of stuff. I just like didn't know what to do. And my friend at that moment, I was talking to this about her. It was a woman actually, and she gave me this book, and it was called Way of the Superior Man by David Data. Right? She gave me that book, which, you know, is ubiquitous now in men's work for a lot of men, love them or hate them. I've come to love David's work, but she gave me that book. She said, I tried to get my little brother to read this so he could like understand women. He doesn't want to read it, so why don't you try it? So I was like, sure. And I was like, what the hell is this Way of the Superior Man? Like even the title alone is like, what the fuck is this guy going on about? But I read the first few chapters of that book and I completed that book in like 2 or 3 days. And everything made sense. It was like a light bulb went off in my head, you know? And so
Wow.
one, some of the
Speaking of a
advice
good
that
present, yeah.
yeah, man, like that book, literally, it was like there is before and after that book. And it's not necessarily everything in that book is like diehard verbatim. It's the way it is, but it just gave me a context and a language to start to look at my life through, start to look at relationships through, start to look like, am I really aligned with doing something bigger than myself in the world? Why do I habitually get into these same type of relational patterns with women, with friends? Why do I feel like isolated? All this kind of stuff started coming up. But one of the things that he directed men in that book to do, he said, go find a men's group, find men that will sharpen you, find men that will challenge you, find men that will heal with you, right? So I took that advice right off the bat. Within a week, I went on, I think, meetup.com, which is a site that people use to like find little groups in different cities and stuff. And I found a men's group and I went to that men's
Wow.
group. And I started going there. I think they only ran once a month, and immediately I was like in love with the work. And
Wow.
so those guys ended up dissolving that group. It didn't last, but they pointed me to their teacher, and their teacher was a man by the name of John Wineland. John Wineland was a student of David Data's for, at that point, I think 10 or 11 years, right? And so
Wow.
was teaching the transmission of his work. So immediately I went to one of his intensives down in California a few months after that. And from then on, the last 3 years, I've been working with John. So I applied to every program that he basically offered for men. And I've assisted in his program now up until this year. And so I just dove deep. And then in the last 6 months, over the course of the last 3 years, I've started to take some of what I was learning and starting to give it back to the world. So I started running workshops last year, started running men's groups. I do 8-week men's groups and just building an online presence, a conversation, and getting into conversations like this. And that's kind of led me up to where we are today.
Wow, dude, love the story, man. I like, I'm listening to you. I'm thinking about my life. Like, same thing happened. Like, I fell in love with a woman, no idea what to do. Like, what does this woman do? Why is she so erratic? Like, totally. Like, I mean, I think they call it. I mean, red pill is probably a little bit slightly different than this, but it's like almost like there's a totally different reality that I think most men are totally unaware of. And then once you kind of read that book, I think I can't remember who actually must have been my best friend who recommended the book. Okay, yeah, I think I devoured it in like 2 days or something like that, and then kept rereading it over and over again. Wow. I wanted to kind of come back to something you mentioned in the beginning, which is the missing father figure. Um, from what I see right now, correct me if I'm wrong, especially in North America, and especially in the US, I think also in Canada, there seems to be this kind of um, uh, I wouldn't say putting blame, but the father is kind of the villains, almost is being portrayed as the villain, like man masculinity is XYZ toxic, all this kind of BS. I think. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that the father is kind of being demonized and being depicted as the villain? Or maybe that's just my kind of interpretation.
No, I totally agree. Man, and that's a big conversation as to why. I mean, you go super deep on it.
Sure.
But where I stand and what I believe and what I've witnessed is there's an institutional agenda, and I don't know if it's purposeful or not, but essentially there is a erosion of the nuclear family that's happening, particularly in North America. And part of it is because we've really embraced hyper progressive or postmodern ideas, where, and I'm going to make an assertion, I don't know if this is true, but you're in Eastern Europe, I think there's more of a traditional view of family in those parts of the world. I've traveled in some of those parts of the world, and like there's something, even I lived in Asia for a while, and you even see like there's a bond of family, that you keep family together, and there's much more of an honor and a respect among these things, right? Where we've kind of ventured to in the West is like there's this super intense focus on hyper individualism. So like the individual, everyone, like single mothers are celebrated, you know what I mean? Like if women don't and I get that, like there's a lot of reasons why men aren't in the picture, especially in this part of the world, but it's something that's become celebrated, in Western media and culture. Like men are often seen on TV and stuff or movies as like these kind of like useless buffoons that don't really know what they're doing. And they're kind of like, you know what I mean? Like we've kind of characterized men, and especially fathers, to be these kind of like idiots, and they need support and everything like that. And that's not really traditionally the case, and there's also been a bond, I think, lost between men and their sons in a way that since industrialization, sons used to apprentice, right? Like a lot of us get our last names from what our fathers did, historically, right? And so there's been that loss, from a man handing down his blacksmithing skills or his carpentry skills or his farming skills or whatever it is, these old trades, as we move to more industrialization, where the father of the house disappears for 8, 10, 12 hours a day to go make money. And that boy is raised by his mother, is raised by women in school, right? Because most teachers, most educators in this part of the world are women. I think it's like 85 or 90%. And most of his life is directed around that. So he goes to school and he has to sit in a desk all day. And he's told that he can't fight or roughhouse. He's told that he can't act out. He's told that he can't run sometimes. They make everything like hyper safe, and in my opinion, like hyper feminized. And it's not that there's necessarily anything wrong with the feminization of things, except for it doesn't apply to boys. And so then when these men act, or when these young boys act out, they're given medication for ADHD, they're punished, they're disciplined, right? It's like that whole thing, if you ever heard about the Gillette commercial that came out a few years ago. They were trying to come down on boys like
my gosh, yeah.
And it's just like you're taking the essence of what it means to be a man, which comes from what it means, from boyhood, and basically making that wrong and making it toxic and and yeah, the impact of that, I think, is carried forward into a generation of men now. And I'm concerned about the generation of men that are to come as well, as to like, they don't have positive role models because they've been made wrong for being innately who they are, and then it's just, I can't imagine that leading to anything positive.
Every single, I resonate with what you're saying. I think for people that are listening, I just want to insert a couple of things. One is there's a great book by, I think, Dr. Warren Farrell called The Boy Crisis. he goes very, very deep into this, and the fact that, the fathers are away, the boy usually learns from the father by observing, and most of the time he sees the father through the mother's eyes. And that could hold, especially if there isn't a good relationship there, that leads to a whole plethora of like issues. And I think the second thing is what you mentioned about the nuclear family and the destruction of it. Recently, I've been getting more and more into this. I think it was like an ex-KGB guy called Yuri Bezmenov, and he talks about this kind of ideological subversion and just changing, especially in the US. He's like an ex-Russian, yeah. So it's still very beginning, but this is like, whoa, like you kind of see everything playing out. He says, I think to destroy a nation takes like 30 years, which is like a few generations. And I think this is what we're seeing right now. And for people who are saying conspiracy theories, don't take it from me, folks. Go and check it out there, and you can kind of see what's happening, right? Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, and I would just add to that, like conspiracy theories aside, I think everybody, especially in the Western world, can agree that we've created something called a corporatocracy. Like really, the religion, I would say, like the religion of the U.S. and Canada and North America is one of bowing down to corporations, really, right? So we've seen, like, through the feminist movement, as much as progress as it made for women, it also had the impact of bringing women into the workforce, where they can actually monetize on consumerism twice as much in the family, because traditionally women weren't working before that. And this is not to say that women shouldn't be able to freely go for work and achieve work, but we have to understand that the impact that has on their children is that women are also responsible to raise their children. They're responsible to be the householder, to do all those things that mothers do, and then also responsible to enter the workforce and stuff like that. And I think, that under the guise of liberation and freedom, there's also been this other piece around creating an even more consumeristic culture. And if everybody wants evidence of that and they want to refute that, go watch the film. There's a documentary, it's 4 parts. It's called The Century of the Self. And it's about how marketing started in America. And in order to convince women to smoke and buy cigarettes, because back in the 1920s and such, like, women, it was seen as like slutty or disgusting or low for women to smoke. They guised the consumption of cigarettes for women under liberation and freedom and women's rights. So like there's a history of this kind of behavior happening. Now you have to be very careful in this conversation, because you can get stuck into like, it can go a really path where if you took the wrong sound bites, it would sound terrible. But all I'm saying is that oftentimes the freedoms that we are allegedly progressing towards, and you especially see this right now in America, are subversions. Like you're saying, there's other ideologies and other agendas that are pushing a different outcome that sometimes we're not really aware of or privy to. And that's not conspiratorial. All you have to do is look at the history. If you look and read about the Roman Empire and its collapse, very, very similar things started to happen near the end, allegedly. Obviously, we weren't there. I wouldn't know that. But the way that society started to become polarized, the way that people felt like they wanted to reject all types of basically morality and structure and tradition is how things start to fall apart at the seams, for sure. It creates massive division in a culture.
I can't remember who I was talking to, but I was saying that, what's happening right now in the US, and I really don't want to be a prophet or anything like this, but you really see some of the signs of I won't say a dying civilization, because I am a believer of good. I have a lot of American friends, but some of the things that are happening there, and this notion of Marxism and communism emerging, like that's super. Like you wouldn't imagine that there'll be something like this happening there, but yeah. I think, what I'm just thinking about this, and I always kind of get a little bit of a strange feeling when I start talking about this, maybe because it's close to my heart, and I see kind of this propaganda. Even I'll give a personal example. I was speaking with my mother, because before I used to be like, oh yeah, equality, both men and women should go and work, and then should be equal. And I mean, equal, like, again, not to get into, because especially with my English is not always not that great, but equal as human beings, absolutely yes. But what I think complementary opposite, is opposed to this whole notion of sameness, everything is kind of the same, egalitarian, etc., etc. Which, yeah, I don't think that's the case. And I think over the last couple of years, I really pulled back a little bit on perhaps being a little bit more conservative, and I like to have the kind of the typical masculine role, what it was 20, 30 years ago. Because even here in Bulgaria and Eastern Europe, there's a lot, there's signs of what's happening in the US, right? The liberation of women, which is great. By all means, go work, do your thing, etc. But I was telling this to my mother because she always likes to work, and I said, Mom, spend some time at home. Like, I really want you to be here and, you know, do, you know, some of the things that you normally do, like cook amazing meals, and the house is clean. And by no means, I'm not saying that she's only doing that. Of course, I'm helping, etc. But yeah, sorry, I'm going a little bit on a tangent here.
I think what I would say to all of that is, like, we have come to a place where, of course, everybody should have equal opportunity to do what they want. Like, that's bar none, for sure. I'm not gonna step over the oppression that's happened to women and everything. Like, they fucking just got the chance to vote in the last century in this part of the world, right? So we're not stepping over that at all. What my teacher says, which I think is really profound, is we need to learn to celebrate our differences. Right? We need to learn to celebrate that there are differences, and that rather than make them wrong or point fingers or having these gender wars that we've had for however long, just celebrate that, like, you know what, we come into this world, we have different hormones, we have different physicality that makes us think different, that makes our emotions different, that makes us want to do different things. Like, I think if a lot of women experience what it's like to have the level of testosterone that men do in their bodies, they would start to understand, like, holy fuck, no wonder we want to, like, put our fists through walls and build things and fuck and, like, all this stuff. It's just like, that's biologically who we are. Now our work is to temper that, you know what I mean? So we can be like, and not to make it wrong, but to understand it and to work with that energy so we can use it to create something powerful in the world, to create something that makes this world a better place. So that's where I stand, which is why my business is the integral alpha. I don't want to get rid of the alpha. I don't want to get rid of the alpha male. The alpha male is great, but how do we fully integrate it physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? You know what I mean? All those pillars. So we have this fully integral, this fully integrated human that we can celebrate the gift of their leadership, celebrate the gift of their tenacity, their ability to take risks, you know, all of the things that we have celebrated men for in cultures immemorial, like forever, you know?
Yes. Yeah, totally, brother, man. I think we're kind of in this very special time where, yes, there's a lot of chaos happening in the world, of this kind of feminization of men. But I think also more and more men are emerging to kind of shaking this off, you know, going away from the stereotypical 60 back in the 60s, like macho man and alpha guy, to going to super extreme feminist. Oh yeah, crying all the time. Not saying bad, crying is bad. Everything taken out of context could be twisted in so many ways. Like,
I got it, man. No, yeah. I call them, like, you have the traditional, like, macho asshole, and then you have, like, the sensitive new age guy, and it makes sense because we're gonna rebound to whatever culture is pervasive. You know what I mean? So, like, guys that grew up with the hyper masculine, like, never shed a tear father are going to be the guys that are like, well, I'm just going to go to India and travel and do yoga and, like, get in touch with my feelings and stuff like that, which is totally fine. That's great. We need guys like that. However, a lot of those guys, I know them, and they can't generate in the world. You know what I mean? It's like staring at your navel all day, meditating. What are you doing? Like, what's the impact you're leaving? How are you leading? You know what I mean? And so then there's naturally what I'm seeing and what's emerging, and I think what I'm riding in this wave of men that we were talking about is coming back to a little bit more of that centeredness. You know what I mean? And to be fucking completely honest, women are dying for it, man. It's not like what you hear in the media, and what you hear is like a very, very small percentage of the conversation happening, because it's clickbait. It gets, like, the news is like that, right? But having worked with, like, you know, hundreds of women in these workshops that I've done with my teachers and otherwise, and having conversations, they want men to, like, fucking lead. Like, they want conscious men that aren't just, like, deep and spiritually deep, but they want them that are, like, on purpose, that are doing something in the world, that aren't so focused on their own emotions and their own problems and their own, like, all that stuff. You know what I mean? They want someone that can ravish them and, like, fuck them open in the bedroom and at large in the world. You know what I mean? In the relationship, blast their heart open and trust them. They want to be able to surrender to someone. And the only way you can do that is if a man builds really magnificent structure in his life, that he's on purpose. You know what I mean? That he's doing something big in the world, that he has brothers, that he has friendships, you know, that he has some sort of practice that's deeper than just making money. All of that, right? All of that matters. And I'm glad that there's a resurgence of this work, and I'm glad to see people having these conversations, because it's giving men permission to be men again. You know what I mean? And be men that are holistic, that are fully integrated, right? That are done the work. So,
man, it seems like this is a deja vu. Every single time I speak to someone that is involved in this work is saying, we speak to a lot of women that are saying, where are all the good men? Like, what is happening? This whole narrative that's painted and I get it. There's women that are very very kind of in leadership positions, or very kind of driven, focused, goal oriented. Okay, that's fine. Maybe not necessarily my cup of tea, but I've been there as well. It's like, okay, cool. I think there's room for one alpha in the family. But even those women is probably, as hard it is to admit for them, they still need a man, someone to ravage them, especially if they're very maybe in their masculine energy in the workplace, in the bedroom. They need the balance.
So like, she doesn't want to come home and keep wearing those pants. You know what I mean? Like, fuck, if a woman wants to go out and be CEO and like crush it, CEO of a company or something like that, fuck yeah, all the power to you. Do whatever you want. However, I have an assertion that if they're a feminine being, you know what I mean, and they identify more with femininity, they're going to want to come home and have a man that can open them, that can open them in a way that they can't be opened at work, because they've been in that shell, they've been in that armor all day long, because they're working with other men. You know what I mean? So it makes sense. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's what I was saying. A lot of these movements, a lot of this conversation has even had women convinced that that's not right, that they have to like shut down and stay in that energy. And like, it's just not the truth. That's not been my experience. I can't speak for everyone. And we live in a time where things are very fluid now, which is fine. Everyone can do whatever they want. Not my problem, whatever. However, I just have had the experience that I don't think is talked about, that there is a deeper yearning from a lot of women, and they want to be taken by men in a way that has them feel fully opened and led, you know. They can lead in some areas of their life for sure, because they're good at it, and they can lead in all the areas of their life if they want, but there's some part of their heart that they can't access, that really only a man has the medicine to, and vice versa, you know. And so that's really that's why we come together in the first place. If that weren't true, then we would all be fine just totally living alone and not having to work with the duality of masculine and feminine.
Exactly. I think over the last couple of years, I've been getting what you'd probably stereotypically call a little bit more old school, a little bit more conservative. But I genuinely believe, at least from, again, I like to think that these conversations are a stream of consciousness. Of course, today I'm thinking one way, tomorrow might change my mind, but I really believe that's the future. Like a little bit more conservatism, putting a lot more boundaries, asserting ourselves as men in the world, and leaving the women to be feminine. Again, if you want to work, that's totally fine, but have that duality, because I think that's incredibly needed, especially in this day and age where kind of the family seems to be under attack from a lot of fronts. We're talking about this for someone, maybe let's say some men who aren't necessarily in agreement to this, or maybe even wondering, kind of scratching their heads. Okay, so where do I start? Like, what should I do right now? What do you think are some perhaps masculine traits or values that men could begin to embody, or build this in their character?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think right off the bat, what men need beyond just traits and stuff like that is they need to get around other men. And they need to get around other men outside of like a golf course or a bar or whatever, the habitual places that men go to spend time together, you know. And the reason I say that is because we all have innate qualities. We all have an essence of things that we're better and worse at and stuff like that. And most of our life, we kind of live in the comforts of whatever that is. We tend to do what we're good at. We tend to focus on what we're good at because we're good at it and it gets results. And this is a mechanism of how we create our life. And when you get around other men, particularly when you join a men's group with other men that have made a commitment to sharpen you, to challenge you, you start to look at some of the parts of your life that maybe you've been keeping in your blind spot or keeping in the shadows, which is easy to do, right? The ways that you've been habitually numbing out, the ways that you habitually have been avoiding looking at the things that you don't want to look at. And a good men's group, men reflect that to you. And then you can start to see, okay, what are the values that like I might think that I embody, but really when push comes to shove, in reality, this guy's saying, hey, like you're not, like I don't see any integrity in
Yeah, what's
at
happening?
all. You never do what you say you're going to do. You never show up on time, whatever that kind of stuff is, right? And so it's the reason that I say that is because it is really hard for us to look at ourselves objectively and then say, oh, I need more of this quality or this trait. I'm just going to go do that, because we are experts at lying to ourselves, right? We're experts at rationalizing ourselves away, like, oh, I was going to go to the gym today, but it's like minus 25 here in Montreal and I don't want to walk and like, like we can find a reason all the time. So one great thing about working with other men is that they'll reflect to you honestly. And in that, you end up trusting those people more. So you really start to build a bond where you can, like, I got a whole list of guys on my phone I could call right now and I could be like, give it to me straight, brother. Like, what's going on here with me? Like, I want to shoot something with you. No, they're happy to listen to me and give me an honest reflection. That is invaluable. That kind of feedback is invaluable in the way we grow. So I really think for men, like, that is the first thing that you really need to do, is find a men's group, because there's another piece around that, which is the accountability. And for me, someone like me, like, I need to be accountable to other people in order for me to take my life to the next level, to take it to where I want to go, and so I use accountability groups with men. I have these containers. I have my own men's group that I'm accountable to showing up every week. I have to be clear. I have to be present. I have to be all those things. So I just really want to reiterate that like the traits, the qualities, and the values that men want to focus on, they oftentimes don't even know what those are until people point them out to them. And then from there, they can really start to get more clarity around what are these things that I want to live up to, because we also have to honor and respect that, like, yeah, each man is different. They're going to be on a different path. If you look at the archetypical, like, if a man feels like he's more in this, maybe he's more of a healer, you know what I mean? And he has other things. Maybe he has to work with a bit more feminine, intuitive energies and stuff like that and things like that. And maybe there's a more traditional, like, kind of a warrior archetype, or a man that builds companies and stuff like that. And he has to show up with the classical, like, honor, integrity, strength, right? Like all that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of nuance in this, but really reflection, in my opinion, and feedback is the best way that we can grow as a man. And it's the hardest way, because like we oftentimes don't want to hear what people have to say when it's the truth.
Oof, yeah. Yeah, very fresh example from today. I went to one of my co-founders and I said, look, I want to be proactive. Give me a little bit of feedback, right? And just hand it to me as it is, a little bit of tough love. And most of the times we suffer in silence, and because we're not very good, at least I'm not very good at communicating boundaries. But when you are surrounded by men, it's very difficult to manage yourself. It's much easier to manage your environment. So surround yourself with people that are going to give it to you straight, as you said, and then just see what happens. And especially if you're consistent with these groups, I think the value really tends to increase over time. There's kind of this snowball effect, if you will. Just to be surrounded by other men, just the more you get to know each other, the deeper the bond, the better the experience.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, man, beyond just like the feedback and being challenged, like there's something when you're just around men, you know what I mean? That there's something different. There's just a different environment, a different feeling. Like my teacher always kind of gives the example, like men will get together and sit around a fire and just grunt. Like they won't even say anything. You know what I mean? They don't need to, because they're just enjoying the freedom of being alive in that moment. And there's none of that that energy that's a bit more lively, like the feminine energy we call it. There's none of that around. So it's like we can just rest David Data would say, like, we could rest as consciousness itself, like we're just free in that moment, right? And so I always encourage guys, and one of the big missions that I kind of am focused on is bringing men back into nature, and just getting a bunch of men out into nature and just spending time together, just being really and being with each other. And there's a bond that's built there. That's just, it's what a lot of guys are missing, especially guys that live in urban environments. And especially now, like here, the COVID lockdowns are pretty heavy. And I have some family members that live out west, and in their small community, not a big town, man, they've had like 17 men kill themselves, all between the ages of like 30 and 40, most of them which they knew, right? Which is crazy amount, because in that town I think there was like one suicide the previous year compared to 2020. So I have a hunch that if those men like were just able to get around other men, get the support that they needed, just be with them, not necessarily get counseling from them, none of that, just be with them, just have the camaraderie of being with your brothers, that outcome might have been different, right? So
yeah, there's something very special that happens when you're around men. I remember back in maybe my early 20s, and even throughout my teenage years, I was always kind of afraid around being around other men, especially this whole notion of some kind of healthy competition. Even at the time, it was just like this kind of inner boy, like, oh, I'm gonna crush this guy. Or I wasn't even aware of how healing, how medicinal, or yeah, I don't know if that's a word, but is to be around other men. Just because, yeah, it's difficult to describe with words. It's something you really have to experience. And I think that men that have these practices and doing them regularly, they know what I'm talking about. But yeah, definitely nature plus being surrounded by other men, it's a recipe for only good things to come.
Absolutely, man. Like, I run this group that we meet every week, and it's just on Zoom right now and I've got guys from Australia, all over the place, on this group. And honestly, it's for them. They've even said this, like, it's worth the admission alone just to be in a conversation with a few other men for a few hours a week. You know what I mean? Regardless of whatever else I guide them through, I teach them, we do practice, all that. They don't even, like, they love that. And that's just cherry on top. But they're like, oh, I just want to like get into conversation with other guys and be around other good men. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, the value of that just can't be understated. And I think that, well, I'm excited that there's more of that. I'm seeing more and more of that, of these gatherings of men getting together, of men spending time in nature. Our group, there was about 50 of us 2 years ago, and we went and spent a week out in Death Valley out in California, just in the desert, just nothing around. And we set up a whole camp in the desert, and we just did ice baths. We did, all sorts of stuff. And just wandered the desert together for a week. And it was like one of the most rejuvenating experiences I've ever had. It did a lot for me.
Wow. That's that's inspiring me to perhaps do something here in Bulgaria, because nobody's talking about this. I tried to organize an event, but COVID kind of canceled everything. But so many women kind of raised their hands and says, my gosh, like, we need this. Like, so many men need this. I'm like, maybe I'm onto something here. But to be able to organize something as big as that, wow, that would be a dream come true. So definitely some inspiration there. Since we're on this topic, I'm curious, and I kind of always ask this question, but what do you think we can do today as men to empower future generations and young kids who are potentially growing up right now, maybe not necessarily surrounded by father figures, or maybe a little bit brainwashed by what's happening in the media, etc., overstimulated with content? What do you think we can do for those kids?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I had a conversation with a 20-year-old kid from Ireland last week. Reached out to me through social media, and I was astounded by his depth and his intelligence and just his awareness and nuance around all these conversations. And we talked a lot about the stuff that we're talking about today. So I've had a few conversations like that. So on one hand, I'm like quite hopeful actually for a lot of these younger men, because I'm just like, damn, when I was 20, I was still like trying to get effed up on the weekends, and they get laid and all this kind of stuff, and like normal things that you do when you're barely out of your teenage years. But on the other hand, I also see, the disparity and just the lack of leadership. And I think as men, especially men in this work, that beyond just something that we should do, I think we have an obligation to learn how to lead younger men and to model leadership. And, that might involve, I was talking with a brother the other day, just yesterday on a Zoom call. And he was saying, I really want to create a program, like almost like an initiatory program for kids that are, 16 to 18 years old, and bring them out into nature and have an experience and teach them about things like stuff that you don't learn, you know what I mean? And stuff that's swept under the rug. Like what does it mean to be a man? Teach them about their sexuality as a man, teach them about all these things that kind of just get swept over or taught institutionally from an agenda, to be completely honest. And so I guess long story short, and it's quite simple, is that, older men should just really be actively seeking and empowering and inspiring younger men to come into their power and to celebrate their masculinity, to celebrate, their manhood, and and bring them together in the same way that we need to come together, man, and just carry the torch, like pass the torch, right? Pass the torch on. And damn, man, like if I had come into this work when I was like 18 or 19 or 20 years old, like I can't imagine like where I would be at now.
Wow.
Because literally since I started this, the last 3 years, my life, like it shifted completely. It was like I did a complete 180 and started living differently. I started doing different work. Everything changed. And so had I had those tools a decade earlier, man, who knows,
I think it's the same. I'm the same for a lot of things. Jiu-jitsu is one of them, and then I kind of knew a little bit about personal development for men, but at the time, it never really occurred to me. Just go to a meeting, go to an initiatory event or a retreat or some kind of a gathering, and just probably the trajectory would have been totally different. But hey, everything happens for a reason. As corny as this sounds, perhaps, so we are where we are right now and trying to make the most of it with the time we have on this planet. You touched a little bit about rites of passage, and I think especially for young boys, I'm also interested. I'm planning to do actually a online course to be able to mentor 14 to I think 18-year-olds. So that's something I'm very, very passionate about, because I remember, man, I was maybe 14, 15. I always had this very strong yearning for someone to kind of, I don't know, come to me and be my mentor and teach me some of the the magics of the universe and how things work and how to handle myself and be around women, and that would have been invaluable. So why are these rites of passage important?
Well, I mean, this is a big conversation that we're hearing a lot about.
Sure.
I'm sure that many of the men you've talked to have talked about rites of passage. I mean, like, especially in the West, like, it's just so fractured. Like, our rites of passage are basically, well, they're non-existent for the most part. And if we do have these certain types of rites of passage, they're incredibly, it's like joining the military, or like, something that on one aspect, sure, but on the other hand, it can leave people pretty fucked up. You know what I mean? My understanding from what I've read is that this is particularly important for men because women kind of have a biological rite of passage, which is when they menstruate, when they reach their period, right? And so there's a clear distinguishing moment where a girl becomes a woman, at least biologically, and they can fulfill their biological imperative or mission here, which is obviously having children, right? Men don't have that. So like, it's murky. There's no clear line. There's no like, okay, you did the thing. You put your hand in the glove with the millions of ants that bit you or whatever it is, or they hung you by the hooks and you danced fasting for 4 days in the sun, or some of these rites of passages that are still around today. And some of these, indigenous cultures that live a bit closer to how we used to, we don't have that. So there's just this like murky line. And then now we've got just a bunch of man children, essentially. like I think it's a Mead book. I can't remember. Um, it's called The Sibling Society, and it talks about this, like how we're all like little brothers and sisters and stuff, because men never really get the chance to have the signifying line, to cut the cord from their mother, you know what I mean, to step into, be like, to be re-welcomed into the tribe, into society, as like, you left the boy, you came back as a man. You know, it's almost like a hero's journey for these people, and it's more about them than about anybody else. It's not so we can signify them like, okay, he's a man now, he can do this, that, and the other. It's for them to have an internal experience, to be like, oh, now I can step into responsibility, now I can step into fatherhood, now I can step into all of these really important milestones, all of these really important responsibilities that men take on in life. And so we're fractured. And so it's like, yeah, we grow up and we have responsibilities, and we can have children, and we can get, do work in the world, but like, parts of us are just so disintegrated that we're still boys, and we're reactive. And I think, like, I don't like the term toxic masculinity, but if I were to apply that, I think that is where that term is coming from, is not about masculinity being toxic. It's about boys that never became men, and they have the bodies of a man. They might have a beard and big muscles, but they're children on the inside, because they never learned not to be. You almost can't even blame them. They never had the proper guidance. Like you said, they never had the mentorship, even if they were seeking it. Right. And especially for the men that grow up in fatherless homes,
Yeah.
So good on you, man. And that's another thing I see, is like, these initiatory rites, these passages, these vision quests are a thing that are growing, right? They're growing. And I think men are really starting to realize, I never had that. I'm going to ensure that my son has an experience like that now.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, for sure. I think, yeah, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I I almost see us living not in an age of patriarchy, although that's kind of being eroded somewhat. And of course, there's like you said, there's nuance to this, but it's more like puerky, the rule of boys, because you see all these like 60, 50, 60-year-old men, but just thinking like a 15-year-old. I think Carl Jung called it arrested development or psychological. They haven't developed because the elders weren't there. The initiatory rights, yeah. And it's just the lack of it, because it's not biological. I mean, it is, but nobody is there to kind of guide them and take them over the bridge. So
and that's the thing, is like, you can fill all of societal's obligations of what would typically be said to be a man in this society. So you can earn money, you can have a family, you can buy a house, you can go on vacations or whatever.
Tick all the
know what I
boxes.
mean?
Yeah.
Tick all the boxes, but that does not make you a man. You know what I mean? It doesn't. And because if you're emotionally, like you said, if you're emotionally 15, if you're reactive, if you, you can't practice any like virtues in your life, what would be typically associated with a masculine, like, you don't need a lot of strength, honor, or courage to go get a corporate job and like marry a girl from high school or something like that. And maybe you don't seek that, for sure, but it's very hard to initiate men into a deeper way of living, a deeper way of being, if the ones that came before them aren't initiated either. So like, even if you look at elders now, like there's 70, 80-year-old man children. Most of them are ruling the world right now. You know what I mean? Like, look at a guy like Trump, love him or hate him, whatever. The guy is like, like, who spends that much time arguing with people on Twitter when you're the ruler of the new world? Like, you know what I mean? Like, in some aspects, for sure, yeah, he's very masculine and he's decision maker and he's cutthroat and all this stuff. But like, inside, that guy's a fucking child in a lot of ways too. And it's like, whatever politician you choose, you can see most of these guys, they're operating from a place that's like, they've layered this false narrative of masculinity, but like underneath, they're not really representing anything that is solid, that is structured, that has an actual foundation. It's more coming from a reaction to look or to be perceived a certain way. And I would assert that like the way the world is, the way that we treat the environment, the way that we, pretty much just have allowed the state of the world to get to where it is because of these disintegrated or these like not fully integrated men, these kind of man children that, that can kind of rise up and get into these positions where they can make huge decisions that change the course of humanity.
Yeah, I see a lot of wounded boys in every kind of facet of society. And I was listening to this guy, Dr. Yuval Noah Harari, I think wrote Sapiens and a couple of other books. He was saying, the three of the biggest problems for society are AI, nuclear war, and climate change, I think. And I'm kind of thinking, but you kind of use first principle, but all of these things, like, most of them are, man-made. Again, you can debate climate change, etc. But I see like really taking care of the men predominantly. So because a lot of them are the rulers of the world, and again, we can argue women versus men, etc., etc. But majority of the world leaders are men, and women have a huge role to play in this. But majority of these men, especially the politicians, my gosh, man. You can see meme after meme after meme. They're just like, what is happening? Like for a person who isn't perhaps a little bit clued up or initiated or been through something like this or exposed to this kind of work, they'll be thinking, yeah, that's a man. Like, what are you talking about, man? And again, people listening to this, I'm not trying to downplay any of this or to kind of suggest that people should feel bad about something like this. I like to think, and I like to say, is that it's not your fault, but it's your responsibility to really step up into the world. So yeah.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't put it better myself. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting, like, just where things evolve as some of these old ways of being, as these people age and they leave this planet, and my dream or my hope or my desire is that we can re-enliven, and I share that with many others, and I'm sure yourself included, and many other men that are doing this work and that you've interviewed, is that like we can initiate, because it's not about us, we might be in this transition phase, but it's not about us, and it's like, who knows who our children, our grandchildren, and their progenitors, the people that come after them, are gonna create, but there's definitely, we're in a time of radical transformation and change. So it makes sense that everything is kind of getting kicked up to the surface. You know what I mean? And I'm excited about what's to come. And I always I've taken a step back, and it's almost comical in a lot of ways, just the state of the world. Like, you can almost laugh about it because it's just,
man,
it seems so outrageous sometimes, like so over the top. They're like, this cannot be real. Like, what are we living in?
Dude, I actually had a lot of anxiety, because I was kind of a little bit exposed to what's happening right now in the world with this kind of pandemic, etc., etc. But afterwards, you know what? Let me take a step back. I'm perhaps a little bit too much into my head, a little bit too overexposed. Yes, the sad part is we lost a lot of elders already. Like you said, entire generations have been lost without kind of sharing their wisdom or being able to expose both men and women to this. But I'm genuinely hopeful. I think men, because of this problem, a lot of men are actually waking up and finding solutions, and women are there also. I think naturally they're a lot more attuned to this, like women's circles and doing all these kind of things, which is, I love. Like, woo, 100%. That's, for all the women listening, just go do you. I'll continue with that.
We all need to be doing our work,
exactly.
I mean? Separately sometimes as well. And what's particular, I just want to touch on that. What's particularly important about, I was talking about men's groups before that I didn't touch on, and I would say this is true for women as well. There's work that needs to happen, especially when you're in an intimate partnership with somebody in a relationship, that can't happen in the relationship. And you need to bring some of those things to your men, and she needs to bring some of those things to their women. And that actually allows you to come back together a much stronger place, and puts a lot less pressure on the relationship. So I just wanted to like throw that little tidbit in there. If anyone's listening, like, holy fuck, like in the relationship, like, go do your work and go do yours, and she should do hers as well. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I think that's the foundation of building relationship. And ultimately all of this is to come back together unified and whole.
Yeah.
So none of this conversation for me over here is about splitting the difference between men and women and trying to make add any more to this conversation that just allegedly is about unity, but ends up fracturing us even more. You know what I mean? And that's really not the conversation that I want to have. And we're both responsible for doing our work, even if we inherited the problems of the world, even if we inherited the problems of a lack of fathership or fatherhood or whatever it is, or motherhood on some side. Like, it's up to us to do that work. And kind of, you know, if I was going to be esoteric, start to clear some of that karma, start to clear some of that the stuff in our lineage and our patterns, because the reason that people rise to power that have is because it's not them even, you know, it's their, it goes back generationally, you know, it's the epigenetical stuff that's happening to them over time and they carry that through their body and into the world, and they rise to power and they basically poison all of us with that. So yeah.
I really think, yes, sir, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's a big responsibility. That's about what I was going to say. It's a lot of to take on, you know what I mean?
Totally. I think, couples, especially listening to this, you're not supposed to be like a psychotherapist to or therapist to any kind of therapist to your partner. So definitely go and do your work. I'm not sure why is this even considered esoterical, but I genuinely believe it. I think that there's actually legit science on this, that we tend to carry all these wounds cross-generationally, right from our ancestors. And I'm a perfect example. Like, I have certain traits or characteristics that I inherited from my father. He's kind of very easily trusting other people and not setting boundaries, etc. So I'll be like, oh wow, I need to be working on this. And I got a lot more conscious around this. And there was this great athlete, American football, Ray Lewis, and his father left him. Like, they had a very abusive relationship, and then I don't know, I think he kind of grew, became his own man, and then he went to kind of make peace with him. And then he kind of asked him, Dad, what did you do all this? Well, again, came back to his father didn't have a father. And then he kind of dug a little bit more, and it turns out it's like 6 generations back with just fatherless boys. So they kind of inherited the same thing, same behavior. And you're like thinking, yeah, this doesn't make sense. I'm like, think again.
Yeah, I mean, they've done, like, this is the how genes are passed on in the epigenetics and stuff like that. And they've done studies of this, man. It's 7 generations in mice is what they found. 7 generations forward. They still carry the trauma. They still carry the epigenetic imprint, the imprint on the gene, 7 generations. And that's in a mouse, man. So, like, you can imagine humans are far more complex than mice. Who knows how many generations that is? I would assert that it's like at least 7 generations of shit we're carrying. So even if we've had like a pretty good life, you know, even if we've had it pretty easy and maybe an upbringing with really good parents and stuff like that, it doesn't mean that we're not carrying a lot of that stuff and that it's not going to show up and come up in the world. So like I said, and kind of like what you're pointing at, is we all have a responsibility. We really do, to clean up some of that stuff. And I think generally, if more people spent time doing their inner work rather than banging pots and pans in the street and complaining about other people and complaining about this race and that politician and this, all that kind of stuff, things would evolve in the direction they want a lot faster.
Yeah, I always kind of tend to think that exactly the same way. Some people call me, oh, this is too idealistic. I'm thinking, is it really that idealistic to ask people to take a little bit responsibility for their lives? And the easiest thing is to be a victim. Oh, victim of circumstances. I get all this. Like, everybody went through a lot of shit. Some people went through a lot more shit and still found a way to come back and make something out of themselves. So yeah, man, I don't like I'm very hard with, especially with men who kind of play the victim card on me. I'm like, yeah, we need to talk.
Yeah, you can be victimized, but choosing to be a victim is a different thing. So, like, things happen and you can be victimized, but choosing the role of victim is a choice. And it's not like you can just snap your fingers and make a different choice. Things happen, for sure. But often what these people want is more power. And the way that you get more power is by taking more responsibility. If you take 100% responsibility for your life, you have 100% power in your life. Because now you have the power to choose. Be like, oh, I created this. Now I can create something else. If it came onto you exogenously, if something happened to you and you said, I had no control over this, I did blah, 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 then you're stuck infinitely in that position, right? And so it's not to step over that people get victimized, but victim is a mind state that you can choose and not choose. And that takes work to get out of, you know, and I still find part of myself sometimes off. Woe is me. Something happened to me. It's not, I have to bring my own humanity into it. It's not that I never feel that, but if you create space around it and say, oh, but this also is a choice, you know, this is another thing that life brought me and I can choose into something else now. Just gives you a bit more access to power, which is what these people are really looking for. All marginalized groups are looking for more power. That's why they feel marginalized, right? And so starting to take responsibility, like what can we do about this? You know, that starts to give a little bit more access to maybe creating the life that you want to create.
Amen to that, brother. Amen. There's a lot of topics we can dive into. I'm conscious of time. I like to ask a question that I normally ask all the guests is, was there something that you wanted me to ask you that I didn't?
There's a piece that I want to share that's been really present for me that I think is the number one thing that men are facing right now. Well, men are facing a lot of things, but it's very, very present in the men that I work with. And I think it's something that a lot of men overlook. And that's men's, their addiction to pornography and sexuality. I think that a lot of men feel like shit. A lot of men don't have the confidence. They don't have the will to power. They don't have the motivation. They don't have the physical energy because they are obsessed with porn. And I would say that like 95% of the guys I work with have some relationship to porn that is unhealthy. And I have been on a journey with myself and with other men about practicing non-ejaculation, like giving up porn, but beyond that, like no ejaculation, right? Like what we call semen retention, how people call no fap on Reddit and stuff like that. You've heard of this. This is the key before anything else, before any type of morning routine or any type of structure in your life or men's program or stuff. You have to control your sexual energy. It's imperative. Like it's just absolutely imperative. There's some great books on it. One I recommend is called Cupid's Poisoned Arrow. And it talks about what happens to our hormones, what happens to our neurochemistry, our brain chemistry after we orgasm, for both men and women. But obviously I'm focusing on men because that's who I work with. And once you read that book and you look at the literature and the science, you start to realize like I have fucked my life up. And I mean that slightly facetiously, but like you have access to so much more power, so much more energy, so much more life force if you start to reorient your relationship to orgasm. And the reason that is because we orgasm to procreate. That's why we obviously, that we're a biological imperative is to procreate, to make more children. We are not meant to do that every day or multiple times a day. Our body knows the difference, they've studied this, between jerking off and having sex with a woman. There's different hormonal things happen. The things that happen when you aren't having sex and you're ejaculating and having orgasms are super destructive. Brain scans show that there really isn't a difference in the dopamine reward system, which is our motivating hormone that makes us want to live and go do things and create in the world and have the energy and motivation to really do anything at all. The reaction in that reward circuit when you orgasm is the same as someone that shoots heroin. It's the same as someone that snorts cocaine, that smokes methamphetamine. So we're lighting up the same pathway as if we're smoking a bowl of crack every single day. Obviously, there's a lot worse physical things that happen to you when you're addicted to drugs, but in terms of like a pure neurochemical level, and this is all refuted by science, this is all supported by science, that once you learn that and you start to learn the impact of that, you start to become a different man. So it's a conversation that doesn't happen a lot, and it's a conversation that men get really defensive about, like, oh, well, what about sometimes it feels really good? Here's one more piece that I want to add to this. We were talking a little bit about trauma, ancestral stuff, right? Have you watched the movie The Social Dilemma?
Yeah.
Okay. So you understand how they use certain colors, they use algorithms to create content to get us more and more addicted.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this isn't an original idea of mine. However, I found it really profound. I have a buddy named Tyson Adams. He's amazing. You can look him up online. He's creating a system for men to help move some of the sexual energy. And him and I got into conversation about the commercialization of trauma, right? And so here's what the porn companies are doing. If you apply the Social Dilemma algorithm kind of approach to how porn companies work, you watch a video, a porn video, whatever. They're watching what parts you're watching when you stop the video, which is basically when guys orgasm, right? The video stops. They take that data because they have tons of algorithms, all that big data. That data becomes what they write the next scripts for the new pornos that they're going to make, so they can continue to monetize us. The reason that men, or most people, are attracted to certain kinks, certain types of pornography, is because it's from actually a traumatized place for the most part, which is why and the deeper guys get into this, it's just like a drug addict, where it's like they need a bit more drugs every time because the circuits are down regulated, so they need more and more and more. So we go weirder and weirder, kinkier and kinkier. The algorithm collects this data, shoots it back into the people that write these scripts, the people that film these videos, these movies and stuff like that, and they sell that back to us. And then all through the advertising and everything like that of the porn industry. So they're taking these things, this trauma and stuff like that that's happened, they're packaging, purposing it up, creating more content out of it and selling it back to us and have us hooked, right? So just like from a pure morality standpoint, like just it's dark. Like that's fucking dark. And so right now I'm in Montreal, Canada. Montreal is the headquarters of Pornhub, which I'm sure many, many men are familiar with. It's like the biggest porn site in the world. You know, not you. Everyone else but you. I've never heard of it, but like yeah.
Nope. Mm-mm.
So
What's
those
that?
guys just but like on a serious note, man, those guys got hit with a massive amount of legal action because of the pure amount of hundreds of thousands of videos and hours of child pornography on their website, right? And so every time you use these websites, like you're supporting that because they're advertising dollars, you know, they're getting the hits on their website for men going to this, right? So it's supporting the sex trafficking, you're supporting child trafficking, child pornography, and then the commercialization of trauma and the profiteering off people's trauma wounds, essentially. Not to mention like a lot of these women that aren't children are just coerced into this work, held at hostage essentially to do this work. All types of just really, really dark, insidious shit. And it's not to shame anyone around this. I just really want to make that clear. It's just about bringing it to light and bringing knowledge to this topic that a lot of men just like, oh yeah, I jerked off, like it's no big deal, like watch a bit of porn. Like guys just kind of, it's casual shit. So there's two components there. The one is like, obviously the porn industry is just dark as fuck, and if you stand for something and you want some integrity, just maybe that's something to move away from. And the second piece is that like your body hormonally, it lowers your testosterone, right? Every time you orgasm, it shoots up something called prolactin, which is like what makes women lactate, you know, which is why men grow man tits. So your prolactin gets fired up, your testosterone drops, your dopamine drops, and it takes 15 days for it to go back to baseline.
What?
Just one orgasm.
What?
Days. Yeah, man. So, so like,
I need to sit down.
yeah, I know, right?
But
so it's hard, man, because we're addicted. A lot of guys, you know, I'm 31 and I found porn at what, 14, 15? That's 16 years, right, of like having pornography in my life or stuff like that. So we're unwinding stuff that's been around for a long time. This is deeply buried and it's the way that we show up to women. You know what I mean? Like, it makes an impact, right? Because this is the initiation that young men are getting, especially kids now. My brother has 2 kids. They grew up with iPads in their hand, right? They're 12 and 13 now. I have a hunch that I'm sure they're looking up naked girl on Google and stuff like that. You know, like that's just
so easily accessible, yeah.
Exactly. Easy accessible. And like, that's their initiation into sex, right? That's their initiation into how women like to be fucked. That's their initiation to how men fuck, like all these things. So these are developing brains, man. Up until you're 25, you know, you're fucking with the neurochemistry in your brains. And excuse my language, but like it's dark, man, and it's not good. So that's a big part of my work now, and that's only been in the recent months since I've really gotten to more conversation about this. And the funny thing is as I talk about it and make content on social media, the response is crazy, because guys are like, holy shit, like, first of all, I've been struggling with this and not telling anyone, because it's like,
There's a lot of shame.
Yeah, exactly. Tons of shame, right? Tons of shame around his sexuality. And the second piece is that they want help, and they want support, and they realize that, like, anyone that does 12-step, and I haven't done it, but I know a lot of guys that have gone through recovery, like, one of the first, I think it's the second thing you do is just you give over your addiction to a higher power. Like, you're like, I don't even have control over this. And I literally think, like, guys are at that level with pornography. They're like, I can't even control this because it's on my phone, it's on my laptop. Guys are watching. I remember I was sitting in a Starbucks one time years ago. There was like an old man just blatantly watching porn right beside me, sitting at the table. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just insidious, man, and it's everywhere. And I think if guys really knew the impact, especially like if you're going to the gym and you're trying to build muscles and stuff, and then you're jerking off every night, like, man, you're taking one step forward and two steps back. Like, you can't take a bunch of T boosters, like testosterone boosters, and eat all the testosterone food and tons of meat and shit like that, and then jerk off, because like like guys are just missing this component in their life. I mean, there's a million avenues that I can take it about why you'd feel better. Our testosterone now as men is half of what our fathers were in the West at the same age. So if, the average man, I would say, like, my father had twice as much testosterone as I did when he was 31, right? And so, like, that's a problem. Like,
there was a great, certain to interject, I think I'm kind of in your flow.
Totally.
There is a great documentary called The Disappearing Male. And ever since the 1970s, when they introduced plastics,
yep,
you kind of see
xenoestrogens.
the testosterone just dropping. And now they kind of normalized you have the normal
low, though. It's so low.
3 or 4 times. Like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude?
Yeah, absolutely. The introduction of plastics. So we have these environmental estrogens, right? They're called xenoestrogens. They're like, they mimic our hormones, and as we touch plastics, as we touch anything that came, pretty much, from my understanding, a lot of petrochemical products, because plastics are made of oil, right? Excuse me. That, our skin is the biggest organ on the body, and it's like a big sponge. And so we're touching these plastics, we're touching our computers, we're touching steering wheels, we're touching everything in life, and we're slowly absorbing these xenoestrogens. Not to mention how our water has been treated at this part of the world. Like, I don't drink tap water at all. I only drink water from springs. I drive an hour to get it and an hour to come back, right? Because, like, I'm just not taking a chance on that stuff. And then men are sedated all day by sitting at their computers. You know what I mean? Like, basically, we've arranged the world in such a way that if you wanted to destroy testosterone, like, this is the best way to do it. Like, vegan diets, you know what I mean? Things like that, like pushing plant-based agenda on the world.
Fake meat and like all this BS. Like, what the fuck, man? Like, what are you crazy, man? Like, what?
If you wanted to destroy testosterone, feed us soy, feed us corn. We're domesticated, right? We're domesticated. And that's exactly what we want in animals too. We don't want them raging with testosterone. We want them docile. You see, like, I farmed for years, right? And you see that they castrate these bulls. You know what I mean? They take the manliness out of them, because that bull, man, like, that thing does not mess around. You want to see some testosterone filled, you go look at a bull, man. Like, those things are just pure muscle, and we've kind of done the same thing with men, with humans for sure, but for whatever reason, there just seems to be a lot of synthetic estrogen everywhere, and it impacts men, particularly on a hormonal level. And the masturbation and orgasm just exacerbates that. Yeah, it just makes it so much worse. So that's something that I'm really fired up about. Obviously,
I can tell.
Doing a lot of work around it. I'm on YouTube. I just started a YouTube channel. I've been making content around this specifically, and it's been getting some, like, people are really interested in hearing more. So I'm kind of focused on that. So I've been doing a lot of research, and then a lot of anecdotal experience, man. Like, if guys are looking for support in that, I do work in that. And there's also, like, great Reddit forums too. If you're on Reddit, like, there's semen retention, there's NoFap, there's lots of guys talking about the benefits they get, 30, 40, 60, 90 years. Some of these guys have gone years without orgasm, man. And, like, I wouldn't, man, to each their own, but they're claiming that like they're basically seeing God now. So like,
Okay. Okay, we need to check this then, sir. But okay.
but no, but
Um,
it's just something to be aware of at least for me.
mm,
So
mm. I mean, there's this kind of if people are into the personal development literature, I think Think and Grow Rich. Napoleon Hill said this kind of there was like what was it? Sexual, basically.
transmutation.
Exactly. There we go. So yeah, I
I got
mean,
the quote right here. Can I read it to you? This is
by all
from
means,
Napoleon
sure.
Hill.
Yeah, do it.
It says, this is great. This fits in perfectly because I was literally just looking at this morning. He says, sex desire is the most powerful of human desires. When driven by this desire, men develop keenness of imagination, courage, willpower, persistence, and creative ability unknown to them at other times. So strong and impelling is the desire for sexual contact that men freely run the risk of life and reputation to indulge it. When harnessed and redirected along other lines, this motivating force maintains all of its attributes of keenness of imagination, courage, etc., which may be used as powerful creative forces in literature, art, or in any other profession or calling, including, of course, the accumulation of riches, which, of course, that book was about. So this shit goes way back, man. Gandhi, like he used to sleep between two virgins just to take their virgin energy. Like, you know what I mean? Like whatever, super esoteric. But guys, Winston Churchill, Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson is like, no, sex kills your energy, man. I want to be the best in the world. I can't have sex. You know what I mean? Of course,
Really, I thought
did,
he was
like,
actually, yeah, he was having
he
sex a
did,
lot.
but before fights, he wouldn't for like 6 weeks, 7 weeks, because like, dude, the energy it builds, most guys don't even realize. They don't even like understand. So, yeah, big topic, but I think it's really
Yeah.
important.
Thank you so much for bringing this. Like I didn't even want to think. I mean, I actually thought about this multiple times. The amount of, you know, parts that I've killed of myself just jerking off for the last maybe 15, 16, I'm 31 right now, soon to be 32. And just, yeah, I remember, oof, man. Okay. And not that, in coming back to what you said about pornography and kind of the dark side of pornography, especially with child porn, that's something that, yeah, oh, I just get
Yeah,
enraged when I think about this. So not that I need it anymore, motivation to do this work and, you know, perhaps also dive into this a lot more. But man, yeah, we have a lot of work to do, put it this way.
yeah, man. I just think that, like I said, it's just something that it's out in the open and everybody knows about it, but it's like the elephant in the room. Nobody's really talking about it. And guys, really, I don't think because the internet is in its infancy still, man. And so is this stuff. We've never had so many novel experiences and access to that much stimulation, let alone sexual stimulation. So I just like the impact, I don't think we're going to be able to measure we're just starting to see it now, but I think it's going to be a few decades before we really understand how fucked up our brains are from all this. So
At least I think, yeah, I think we've become a little bit victims of our own progress.
totally, 100%.
Yeah, just like what, yeah, for the fact that we live in so much comfort right now, it's like we become so almost like castrated, docile, you know, just like,
Yep.
yeah, well, where's the that factor?
It's like we progress, but like towards what? You know what I mean? Are we happier? You know, the statistics don't show that. They don't show. They show the opposite, right? So it's like, yeah, we're on this continual path of progression, but like, what are we progressing towards? You know, faster, quicker, better, easier. For what?
I'm trying to normalize slowing the fuck down, just taking a deep breath, and yeah, because I get anxious sometimes a lot, especially because I have like a very intense work that I do. But yeah, these things, these conversations always kind of give me a little bit of perspective of hopefully the second and the stage of my life where I'm going to be committed to this fully. So yeah, one step at a time.
Absolutely.
Brother, man, we went over time, but I'm so very glad that we did this. There's a lot of things to unpack here. We should definitely do a part two. Um, if people resonate with your message, which I'm sure a lot of men will, where can they find more about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the business is Integral Alpha, integralalpha.com. You can integral.alpha on Instagram. I'm on YouTube. And I'm just starting up again, an 8-week leadership course. So it's a men's container. It's limited to between 10 and 12 men, weekly calls. So you can be anywhere in the world. And we dive deep. We do a lot of deep embodiment practice, which we didn't really touch on today, but a lot of energetic practice, a lot of how to move energy through your body, how to transmute this sexual energy, and then how to lead, how to get in touch with the core masculine that you are, your essence, and then how to lead from there in relationship, in business, in all aspects of your life. So check that out. Just reach out to me. You can add me on Facebook. It's Evan Veritas, Veritas, and I'm easy to find. So
perfect. Wow. Brother man, thank you very much for coming, sharing all this wisdom. I can see the fire burning in your eyes, especially when you're talking about some of these topics. So keep doing you, keep sharing the message. I think you're doing great work, man.
all right. Well,
And for all of you, likewise, thank you very much. Pleasure was all mine. For all the people listening, watching this, by all means, go check Evan's Instagram, Facebook, YouTube channel. Definitely go and subscribe. And I'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.